Chosen one, something enormous begins shifting between July 6th and July 12th, but most people will misunderstand what is happening while they are inside it. This week may not begin with a miracle. It may begin with pressure, a delay, a difficult conversation, someone changing their attitude, a decision taking longer than expected, a plan suddenly becoming complicated. You may look at the first days of the week and think something is going wrong. Do not decide too quickly. The story of this week develops in stages. First, pressure reveals what can and cannot carry weight. Then something you believed begins losing its power over you. After that, practical truth becomes more important than promises. An old pattern appears in a form you may not immediately recognize. Finally, near the end of the week, missing information may connect events that seemed completely unrelated. That is why only a few will understand the signs. The beginning and the ending may appear to contradict each other. Something that looks closed on July 6th may look completely different by July 12th. A person you thought had made a final decision may reconsider. A plan you were trying to protect may reveal that it was taking you toward the wrong destination. A small opportunity may connect you to something much larger, or information may appear that changes the meaning of a situation you thought you already understood. The enormous shift may begin somewhere nobody can see yet. It could be happening behind a decision, inside a conversation taking place without you, within the mind of someone who underestimated you, or inside an opportunity that has not reached your phone yet. For some of you, the shift is beginning in an even more private place, your own definition of what you want. The first part of the week may feel heavier than expected. Something asks more from you. A person becomes harder to satisfy. A deadline becomes serious. You may need to explain your position, correct something, finish what you have delayed, or confront a weakness in a plan you hoped would simply work itself out. This pressure is not meaningless. Pressure reveals structure. A bridge can look strong until weight is placed on it. A relationship can look stable until honesty enters the room. A project can sound exciting until someone asks who is responsible for the details. A person can promise support until support requires real action. Watch what happens under pressure. Someone who speaks beautifully may disappear when responsibility becomes real. A project that looked perfect may reveal that its practical foundation is missing. A relationship may become uncomfortable when one direct question is asked. But the opposite can also happen. Someone you barely noticed may become reliable when things become difficult. A quiet person may solve the problem. An alternative route you considered less important may suddenly prove stronger than the original plan. The first sign of the coming change is not who speaks the loudest. It is what remains standing when reality enters the room. This distinction matters because you are moving into a chapter where appearance will become less useful to you. You are going to care less about how something looks and more about what it can actually carry. There are impressive opportunities that cannot carry growth. There are beautiful connections that cannot carry honesty. There are people who enjoy the idea of supporting you until your success changes the balance between you. July's second week may show you the difference. And chosen one, truth does not always arrive as a pleasant feeling. Sometimes it arrives as the moment an old excuse stops working. You may have spent too long explaining someone's behavior. You understand their fear, their childhood, their stress, their confusion, their bad timing. Your empathy becomes so strong that everybody receives an explanation while you continue receiving the consequences. This week can interrupt that habit. Understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not require you to remain in the same position with them. Compassion does not mean giving someone unlimited access to your life. That is one of the deeper changes beginning this week. Access. Who has access to your time, your attention, your work, your ideas, your emotional energy, and your availability? Someone may notice that the version of you who was always reachable is changing. Watch their reaction. A person who respects you will adjust. A person who benefited from unlimited access may try to make your boundary look like cruelty. There is no need to fight them. Their reaction itself gives you information, but the pressure at the beginning is only the first part of the story. Soon after, you may start questioning whether you even want what you have been fighting so hard to receive. That can be frightening. For months, perhaps years, your mind may have been organized around one outcome. One person, one job, one move. One opportunity, one future. Then something inside you asks a dangerous question. Do I actually want this anymore? Do not dismiss that question. As Neptune turns retrograde, themes connected to fantasy, projection, idealization, and personal desire become more complicated. For some chosen ones, the most important revelation of this week will not be discovering that somebody else lied. It will be realizing that you have outgrown a story you once needed. Perhaps you called someone your destiny because admitting they were unavailable would force you to grieve. Maybe you called a career your dream because you had already invested too many years to imagine another direction. Perhaps the life you keep trying to manifest belongs to the version of you from 5 years ago. You never stop to ask whether the person you are now still wants to live there. This week may ask the question for you. One of the strangest signs can be a loss of fascination. The person who occupied your mind becomes more ordinary. The approval you wanted suddenly feels less valuable. A dream still looks impressive, but it no longer feels alive inside you. Do not panic. Sometimes the false part of a dream has to weaken before the real desire underneath it becomes visible. Maybe you did not want fame, you wanted freedom. Maybe you did not want one particular person as much as you wanted mutual love, emotional security, and the feeling of being chosen without having to fight for it. Maybe you did not want the title. You wanted respect, creativity, and control over your own time. Maybe you did not want revenge against the people who underestimated you. You wanted to stop feeling powerless. Those are very different desires. When the deeper desire becomes clear, life suddenly has more than one route available. But while you remain attached to one image, every alternative looks like failure. This is why the middle of the week may feel confusing. The old map stops making sense before the new route becomes obvious. You may think you are losing direction. Perhaps you are simply losing a destination built by an older identity. Do not run back towards something only because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. The human mind often prefers familiar disappointment to unfamiliar possibility. You already know how to wait for the old person. You know how to complain about the old job. You know how to survive the familiar problem. A new direction removes those habits. Now you have to learn again. That can feel uncomfortable even when the change is right. Only a few people will understand this sign. When the old life begins feeling strange, they will think they are lost. But the real process may be recalibration. There may be a morning this week when the thought that usually enters your mind first is absent. You are not immediately thinking about the person. You are not immediately afraid of the result. You are not checking what changed overnight. For a few quiet minutes, your mind belongs entirely to you. Pay attention. Freedom often begins this way. Not with a dramatic announcement, but with the realization that something has less power. Do not immediately fill that space with another obsession. Let your mind become quiet enough to show you what wants to grow next. Around the middle of the week, practical evidence becomes important. Venus moving into Virgo shifts attention toward details, usefulness, discernment, and what actually works in daily reality. This is where many people will miss the sign because they are waiting for something dramatic. The enormous shift may first appear as a small improvement. A person begins showing care in a practical way. Someone brings information you can actually use. An offer arrives with real numbers instead of vague promises. A person who never made a dramatic speech becomes surprisingly consistent. A skill you treated casually begins attracting interest. Pay attention to what functions. There is a difference between a person who creates emotion and a person who creates stability. There is a difference between someone who says they believe in your work and someone who creates access to an actual opportunity. There is a difference between an idea that excites you for 3 hours and something you could realistically build for 3 years. This week asks you to notice those differences. You may become less impressed by promises. Someone says they will do something, and instead of becoming excited, you wait calmly to see whether they actually do it. Someone tells you how important you are, but you notice whether their daily behavior supports the words. An opportunity sounds glamorous, but you ask practical questions. That is not cynicism. It is discernment. You are finally allowing reality to participate in your decisions. For too long, some chosen ones have built entire futures from potential. The potential of a person, the potential of an idea, the potential of what could happen if every uncertain part of the situation changed exactly as hoped. Potential matters, but potential without movement can become another place to hide. July's second week may show you what is actually moving. This can create a surprising role reversal. A person you considered central may become less important. Someone you barely noticed may become useful. An opportunity you were chasing may become quiet while a smaller alternative begins growing. Watch what changes rank in your life. Something you considered important may start losing value, while something you almost ignored begins making more sense. Do not resist this simply because it contradicts the old plan. Your life is allowed to reorganize. You are allowed to realize that you misjudged the value of something. Perhaps you believed one person was the center of your relationship story. Then another connection begins showing you a completely different form of communication. Maybe you believed one professional path was your only serious route. Then someone shows you how a skill you already possess can be used differently. The enormous shift can begin through reassessment. When value changes, attention follows. When attention changes, decisions change. Eventually, life itself changes. There may also be a financial sign hidden inside this week, not necessarily sudden wealth, something more useful. You may notice where value has been leaking. A small repeated expense becomes obvious. You realize you are charging too little. Someone asks whether they can pay you for something you never considered monetizing. An old customer or contact returns. Something you created before suddenly has a new use. People often miss these signs because they are waiting for a giant amount of money to appear. But financial change frequently begins with a change in perception. You recognize value where you previously saw nothing unusual, or you stop wasting resources on something that gives nothing back. The same principle applies to time. How many hours disappear into emotional situations that never move? How much concentration is spent checking something you cannot control? How many conversations repeat without producing understanding? The change coming into your life may require resources, and this week can begin showing you where those resources are being lost. Then comes one of the most important parts of the week. Something from the past may appear again, but I am not automatically talking about an ex returning. The deeper possibility is that a pattern returns, and you may not recognize it immediately because it has a different face. Imagine spending years involved with someone who kept you uncertain. You finally leave. Later, you meet someone completely different personality, different appearance, different life. But after a few conversations, something familiar begins happening. You are waiting again, interpreting again, making excuses again. The person changed, the role did not. This is one of the signs only a few will understand. Most people recognize patterns only when the entire story repeats. Chosen ones are being asked to recognize the beginning. Maybe the pattern appears through work. Your previous employer gave you responsibility without authority. You move to another company and slowly the same dynamic begins forming again. Perhaps you have a habit of helping people who refuse to help themselves. A new friendship begins, and suddenly every conversation becomes a crisis you are expected to solve. The enormous shift occurs when you recognize the structure before becoming trapped inside it. This can accelerate your growth. You may understand something in days that once required years. Imagine how different your life becomes when you recognize an unhealthy pattern after the second sign instead of the 100th. Think of the time saved. Think of the opportunities you remain available to because you are no longer spending months trying to change something that has already revealed its structure. This is maturity, not becoming cold, becoming faster at understanding reality. One chosen one may notice this romantically. A person begins using silence to create uncertainty. The old version of you would have become more curious and more emotionally invested. The new version becomes less interested. Another chosen one may receive a business offer without clear terms. In the past, you might have been afraid to ask questions because you wanted the opportunity so badly. Now you ask for details before agreeing. That one response can change the entire power dynamic. Someone may be surprised by you this week. They prepared for the old reaction, but that version of you is no longer completely available. And when you change your position, people around you may change theirs. A person who believed you would always initiate may finally have to decide whether they want to participate. Someone who was comfortable underestimating you may discover that another person values your contribution. A client who believed they could return whenever they wanted may realize your time is no longer equally available. Do not change behavior to force a reaction. You are not playing a game. You are simply no longer organizing your life around getting the reaction. That is real power, and when power moves, relationships reorganize naturally. Some people come closer with greater respect. Others disappear because access was the only thing they valued. Let the result teach you. There may also be contradiction during this week. You hear one version of a story, then another version appears. Someone says a decision is final. Later, you discover that it is still being discussed. A person tells you somebody feels a certain way about you, but direct behavior suggests something different. An old family story may sound different when another person finally speaks. A professional decision may have more layers than you were originally told. Do not build a permanent future from incomplete information. Mercury's retrograde journey through Cancer reaches an important cazimi point near July 12th, creating a symbolic moment of insight inside the retrograde process. This is why the week can end differently from the way it begins. Information changes meaning. A missing detail appears. You suddenly connect two conversations that seemed unrelated. Something that happened weeks or months ago makes sense differently. The event is old. The information is new. You may discover why something was delayed, why someone disappeared, why a family member made a strange decision, why a project stopped, or why your name suddenly returned to a conversation. Do not assume the truth must always be dramatic. Sometimes the missing information is one simple sentence. A decision changed later. A message was never received. Someone recommended you. The position reopened. The first plan was never final. One sentence can reorganize months of assumptions. This is why you must be careful with the stories created when information is missing. The human mind hates empty spaces, so it fills them. A person does not answer and the mind creates rejection. A company delays and the mind creates failure. Someone behaves strangely and the mind creates betrayal. Sometimes the interpretation is correct, sometimes it is not. July's second week can expose the difference. And chosen one, the truth may not always give you the outcome you wanted, but accurate truth gives you something confusion never can. Direction. You cannot move intelligently while living inside 10 competing explanations. Once you know what is real, you can decide what comes next. Perhaps you stay, perhaps you leave. You might respond, wait, ask a direct question, build another route, or finally walk away. The correct response depends on the situation, but clarity creates movement. This is why something enormous can shift because of one piece of information. Your external life may not change immediately on July 12th, but the decision that eventually changes it may begin there. Imagine waiting 6 months for one possibility, then information arrives. Within 1 hour you stop waiting, your attention becomes available for another direction. 2 weeks later you notice an opportunity you would have ignored before. Months later your life looks completely different. What started the chain? The moment your attention became free. This is how enormous change often begins. There is another possibility during this week. Someone may change their mind about you professionally, personally, or socially. Perhaps someone judged you too quickly. A person did not understand your idea. A decision maker selected another option. You assumed the story was finished. Then something changes behind the scenes. Another person mentions your work. The first choice does not work. New information appears. Your name returns. Do not sit waiting for this prediction. Live your life. But if someone unexpectedly reopens a conversation you believed was closed, pay attention to what changed. And do not immediately accept simply because they returned. You have new information too. You are allowed to evaluate the new offer from your current position. Restoration is not always being invited back into the same place. Sometimes restoration means being invited back and realizing you no longer want what you once begged to receive. The door opens, you look inside, and instead of running through it, you ask whether it still leads toward your future. That is growth. A person may become more interested after you stop waiting. An opportunity may return after you begin building another route. A social environment may welcome you after another room has already recognized your value. Then you realize the real change was never their decision. It was your dependence on their decision. That dependence is weakening. And when it weakens, you can choose instead of only hoping to be chosen. Another sign to watch is a small mistake becoming unexpectedly useful, a scheduling mix-up, a forgotten document, a conversation that happens because someone misunderstood why you were there, an unexpected delay that places you in contact with another person. Do not romanticize mistakes. Most mistakes are simply mistakes, but pay attention to what a detour introduces. Suppose a meeting is moved. You speak to someone you would not have met on the original day. That person mentions a project. The project connects to your skill. Nothing dramatic happens immediately. Months later, you understand the chain. This is why only a few understand the signs. Most people recognize important changes only after the final result becomes obvious. The chosen one learns to notice unusual connections before the full meaning appears. Not through paranoia, through awareness. You are not searching every second for supernatural proof. You are noticing when separate events begin pointing in the same direction. One person mentions a place you never considered. 2 days later, another unrelated conversation brings up the same place. A project appears. Then someone with the exact knowledge you need enters your network. A subject you previously ignored begins appearing through independent sources. This does not mean you must change your whole life immediately. It means investigate. Sometimes life introduces a subject before it introduces the opportunity connected to that subject. Your future may be introducing itself. Pay attention to what keeps returning from different directions. There may also be a strange removal this week. A responsibility disappears. Someone who constantly asked you to solve their problems finds another solution. A project is transferred. An obligation you expected to carry changes. At first, you may feel unimportant. Be careful with that interpretation. Perhaps space is being created. Some people become so used to being needed that freedom feels like rejection. Their identity is built around solving, managing, saving, and supporting. When nobody needs them for one moment, they do not know who they are without the responsibility. This week may reveal whether being needed has become confused with being valued. They are not the same. A person can value you without creating emergencies for you to solve. An employer can respect you without overloading you. A relationship can be meaningful without one person carrying the emotional life of both people. If a burden is removed, do not immediately search for another burden to prove your importance. Use the space. The enormous change may require energy that has been occupied by responsibilities that were never truly yours. Another sign can appear as a preview of the future. You spend several hours somewhere and feel unusually natural. You speak with a different group of people and realize the conversation energizes you. You work on something unfamiliar and lose track of time. You visit another place and unexpectedly imagine yourself living there. You meet someone and remember how easy, honest conversation can feel. Then the moment ends. You return to your normal environment, but something has changed. Now you have contrast. Before that experience, you may have believed your exhaustion was normal. Your professional frustration was simply adulthood. Your relationship anxiety was simply love. Then you experience something different, even briefly, and the old explanation stops working. This is one of the most powerful ways a life shift can begin, not through escape, through evidence that another experience is possible. The preview does not mean you should abandon everything. It gives you information. Maybe the future is not exactly the place you visited. Maybe it is the quality you experienced there. Freedom, respect, peace, creative energy, intellectual connection, or the feeling that you can exist without constantly defending yourself. Ask what the experience showed you. The exact form may change. The quality is the clue. By the final days of the week, you may realize the main story was never where you thought it was. You thought it was about getting a person to respond. The real story was learning whether the relationship could support mutual effort. You thought it was about a job decision. The real story was discovering another use for your ability. You thought it was about being blocked. The real story was identifying a structure that could not carry your future. You thought it was about the past returning. The real story was discovering whether the past still controlled your decisions. This is why the signs may be confusing while they happen. You are looking at individual scenes. The meaning belongs to the sequence. The pressure at the beginning, the dissolving illusion, the shift toward practical reality, the return of an old pattern, the information that connects the story near the end of the week. These are not random pieces. Together they create a story of correction. A belief may be corrected. A relationship dynamic, a professional direction, a financial habit, an emotional attachment. The enormous shift begins when correction becomes possible. Most people resist correction because it feels like admitting they were wrong. Chosen ones need to understand something deeper. Changing direction when new information arrives is not failure, it is intelligence. You are allowed to admit that you wanted something then and no longer want it now. You are allowed to recognize that you believed someone before and have more information today. You are allowed to see another route. You are allowed to recognize that something you once called love now looks like a pattern you have outgrown. You do not owe eternal loyalty to a conclusion formed with incomplete information. This week may give you information you did not have before. Use it. There may be a moment near the end of the week when several things make sense at once. You understand why one person acted strangely, why a plan was delayed, why another conversation happened, why you lost interest in one direction, why something small kept attracting your attention. Do not expect the answer to explain your entire future. It may only show you the next correct move. That is enough. People delay their lives because they demand a 10-year map before taking a 1-week step. Life rarely works that way. You receive enough light for movement, then movement reveals more. Chosen one, the enormous shift is not asking you to know everything. It is asking whether you can recognize when the old answer no longer fits the new information. That is the real test of this week. Can you adjust without panicking? Can you let someone reveal themselves without explaining the evidence away? Can you admit that an impressive dream may no longer be your dream? Can you recognize an old pattern when it arrives through a new person? Can you notice practical value instead of emotional volume? Can you wait for the week to finish its sentence before deciding what the beginning meant? Only a few will understand these signs because most people react too quickly. They decide the delay is failure. They decide the return is destiny. They decide intensity is love. They decide a small opportunity has no value. They decide new information cannot change an old conclusion. But you, chosen one, are being asked to move differently. Observe before attaching meaning. Ask before assuming. Compare words with behavior. Notice patterns instead of building a future from one moment. Follow the sequence. By July 12th, something may become clearer. The answer could arrive through a message, a conversation, a document, a changed decision, a realization, a piece of family information, or a professional update. The form will be different for everyone. The purpose is similar. Something difficult to understand becomes easier to place inside the larger story. And once the meaning changes, your next decision changes. That is where the enormous shift becomes physical, not in the sign itself, in the choice you make after understanding it. A sign without action becomes entertainment. Clarity without decision becomes another form of delay. Information is useful because it helps you move more intelligently. This does not mean rushing. It means respecting what reality has shown you. When someone repeats the old pattern, pay attention to the structure instead of the promise. When a practical opportunity keeps developing, examine it seriously. When your desire changes after an illusion dissolves, stop forcing yourself to want the old future. When new information reveals that your previous conclusion was incomplete, update the conclusion. Movement begins there. Chosen one, July 6th through July 12th may look like a strange week from the outside, a frustrating beginning. A changing desire, a practical opportunity, a familiar pattern, a surprising piece of information. Most people will experience these as separate events. You may eventually understand that they belong to the same transition. Something enormous is shifting. The pressure is revealing what cannot continue. The fading illusion is revealing what you actually want. The practical details are showing you where real value exists. The familiar pattern is giving you a chance to choose differently. The late information is correcting the story. And somewhere inside that sequence, a new direction begins. Do not expect everyone to understand your decision immediately. They did not receive the information through your experience. They may still see the old version of the story. Let them. You are responsible for moving according to what has become clear to you, not for making every person comfortable with the change. By the end of this week, you may realize that the biggest sign was not what happened around you. It was the fact that you did not react the way you once would have. The delay did not destroy your confidence. The person becoming distant did not make you chase. The repeated pattern did not trap you. The glamorous promise did not distract you from practical truth. The new information did not make you defend an outdated belief. You adjusted. That is power. And power is exactly what allows an enormous shift to become sustainable. The universe may open a new direction, but a person committed to old reactions can recreate the old life inside a new environment. That is why this week matters. You are not only being shown new possibilities, you are being shown whether old patterns still have authority over you. Watch carefully. Something is beginning this week. Between July 6th and July 12th, the first pieces begin moving. A wall reveals weakness. A dream changes shape. Value becomes clearer. The past tests the present. Information finds its way back. Then you see something you could not see before. That is the sign, a genuine change in understanding. And once you understand differently, chosen one, you cannot continue living exactly the same way. Right, I am ready to understand the signs in the comments if this message reached you before the week begins to reveal its full story. Do not chase every sign. Watch the sequence. Look at what the delays expose. See what remains after fantasy clears. Study where the practical openings laid. Recognize the structure when an old pattern appears in a new form. And do not make permanent decisions from incomplete information. Let the missing piece arrive. Something enormous starts shifting this week. Most people will notice only the individual events. The chosen ones will understand that the events are connected. And when the final piece begins falling into place, you may realize the change was already happening long before anyone around you could see it.